Friday, GM announced plans to bring corporate workers back to physical locations at least 3 days per week. After significant backlash from employees, though, today they walked back that plan.
You get companies saying, well, we know you're more productive when you're in person. At the same time, you get individuals who are saying, well, I'm just as productive working from home. The need to ground in a shared reality is just so important. And I just see so few organizations actually doing that.
More employers are mandating that workers return to offices at least 3 days a week. Are these return to office mandates a good thing for business or not?
So I'm Ben Waber. I'm a visiting scientist at MIT. I'm also a senior visiting researcher over at Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto. Wrote the book People Analytics, one of the co-founders of Humanyze, and great to be here. I really think of the work environment broadly as a management tool to change and influence how people work, right? And I mean, you even said the words, work environment. And I also think about this very broadly. This isn't just about, physical offices. It's not just about, doing Zoom meetings or whatever. It's really, holistically thinking about how do these different tools change how we either do our work in an individual focused way? How do they change how we collaborate? And thinking about that not necessarily as much from the individual perspective, but much more from the macro perspective. I want to know, much more generally, what are the replicable things that I can learn about how to change how people work? Right? Are there things I can do that lead to more focused work, or things I can do to encourage communication between different teams or parts of the organization in different cities or different time zones, and really thinking of this as a collection of tools that we have at our disposal, and ideally something that then we can change over time depending on what we need to happen, and also acknowledging that even if all the data in the world shows that some decision that we make, let's say sitting people next to each other, makes them communicate more, as an example. That isn't a guarantee, right? And so rather than looking at results, trying to buy into the process of doing things by the numbers, and even if, at the end of the day, a certain way we have people work doesn't exactly do what we want, then to reorient based on that. The lesson that I actually wish that we took from the pandemic, but we haven't, it's done, is that, again, if you give people a good reason, people can change how they work effectively very quickly, right? I actually think that's the lesson. If in 2019 you'd asked me how long it would take for a company to go to full remote work, I would have said at least 6 months, probably longer, probably years. And it turns out I was wrong, right? It was actually 2 weeks. What that has now done is open up the aperture of what are reasonable workplace environments. Companies that didn't even consider having people work from home before, that is now suddenly an option. Problem is that as individuals, we don't have a good view of what's going on in the broader, organization, team that we work with. I need to get a bunch of individual work done today, and so actually working from home is going to be more effective. However, going into the office would be better for the whole organization in terms of who I could connect with each other, a variety of other things. As an individual, I lack that perspective. Without, I would argue, much more quantitative data, people are just going by vibes, which also doesn't tell you very much. I sort of think that this is one of the core issues today, is that pretty much everybody is going by vibes. You have executives going by vibes or saying, oh, well, this is how I worked, and they have certain preferences. And then individuals are doing the exact same thing, but they have very different preferences. Part of this lack of understanding on all sides around first of all, what is the purpose of a workplace? And again, I would argue that without more quantitative data, it's sort of your opinion versus my opinion. And so then it becomes a power exercise. And again, this is like, so yes, we have more choices, but now we also have more opinions, and we don't have any, like, and very few organizations are doing this with any more data, which is leading to more problems. We've gotten pretty good at designing office environments that are, more flexible, where you can, move things around, where you can, exert your own choices in terms of changing lighting levels, a whole bunch of things that, like, we can do. And so I do think that the challenge is, as an organization, allowing enough of that so that you accommodate the natural variance in the population, but not so much that people just always just default to whatever it is they want to do. Like, that's what they do. I think it's much more of a policy and process perspective. Like, that's actually the challenge. For me, it would be, okay, well, here's a guidance we have for the whole company of how people work. And then what that should do is filter down to the division and then to the team. And then that's tuned based on what those different parts of the organization need. And then that changes every, let's say, quarter. I think the challenge is more, there's a number of things. So one is that in that sort of a world, people need to be okay with the fact that, okay, well, this quarter, I'm coming into the office these 4 days a week, but this other team that I work with sometimes, they're actually coming in 1 day a week for a whole variety of reasons. And it's not that that's unfair. Like, that's actually what the team needs, and I have to be okay with that. Again, that's a psychological, that's a cultural change. Beyond that, another change is, I have to be okay with, all right, well, this quarter we're doing, again, I'm in 4 days a week. And then the next quarter, I'm actually working remotely the whole time. That's normal. It's not a problem of, like, the workplace environments we have at our disposal. Like, we have the ability to do that. There are also tools there, right? Like, co-working spaces now exist. I don't think that's actually the hard part. I think it's more like, okay, all the cultural machinery that has to go on beside that. And I think a lot of companies just don't want to go through that exercise. And as a consequence, it is going to significantly inhibit their performance and growth in the medium to long term. I think there's a huge opportunity here because, again, the point is that organizations that then take this approach, not only will their performance be higher, but this is not something where your competitor can just buy some piece of software or buy some nice office and then tomorrow they'll be where you are. No, that's not actually not how it works. They just are going to be extremely behind from a cultural and process perspective. And there will be, if you keep pushing, it is impossible for them to catch up. So I do think that, you will eventually get some organizations that start to do this. You're starting to see very slight inklings of it, but it's far slower than I would like. I do think it is, we still very much are in this, I would argue, like a thrashing period where companies don't know what they're doing. They pretend to know what they're doing. They're defaulting to one-size-fits-all policies that are kind of weird and mostly informed by the desires of the C-suite. Psychologically, I get it, but these are terrible decisions, right? Viewed through the lens not of what do people like in that moment, right? But viewed through the lens of how does this change how we function. I will say, I'm not saying you completely ignore desires, of course not, right? You do need to factor that in. But I think right now we're indexed way too far on those things. And more towards how do these things change the way that we work? How does that match or not with what we want as an organization? And then if the data indicates that something still looks like a good idea, but we're pretty sure that 50% of people are going to quit if we do that, then of course, don't do that. Companies are not doing this, right? That's not how they're engaging in this. They're doing a survey, asking the CEO what they want to do, and they're like, well, let's shade a little bit in the direction of what the survey says people want to do, but closer to what the CEO does. That's the methodology, which is a lost opportunity. My ideal mechanism is that there would be mandates that change over time. That is the ideal, right? But again, also they would essentially be backed up with actual data and also have very clear success metrics. Again, this idea that we are trying to do this because we believe that working this way will accomplish X, Y, and Z. Being very explicit about that, being very quantitative about that. And then also being transparent, because if it doesn't work, hey, we think that having people come into the office 4 days a week is going to lead to more communication across teams. It could not happen. And so you should be transparent and say, okay, well, the metric we're looking at is this. And then a month later, we looked at that metric and it didn't work. So let's try something else. What people, again, showed during the pandemic, give me a good reason and I can change. And a good reason is not, this is what the CEO wants to do. Like, that is not a good reason. The question is much more, how does this change how we work? It's not, these very vague notions of productivity. Like, are people more productive in the office? And this is the problem, right? Because then you get companies saying, well, we know you're more productive when you're in person, which is like, that's unclear. Like, what are you basing that on? At the same time, you get individuals who are saying, well, I'm just as productive working from home, which is also not true, right? It's like, you could feel more productive. The need to ground in a shared reality is just so important here. And I just see so few organizations actually doing that. There's a number of class of data that I like to use to understand, how work happens. There's, broadly speaking, three classes of data. So there's, people data. This is talking about data from HR systems, hiring systems, things like that. Who's on what team, tenure rates, all those things. Demographic breakdown of employees, hiring rates, what have you. Then you look at collaboration patterns from work systems. So this is email, chat, meeting data. This is video conferencing. These are software development tools. All the things that we use on our computers to work generate an awful lot of data on how work happens. And one way to look at that is just through like, how many hours are people working? That is not super useful. Also, again, with all this, I'd like to aggregate it up and we can talk about the very significant privacy and ethical implications of this kind of data collection. However, what you consistently see as being more important from that kind of data are the patterns of collaboration between people. Sort of, are networks tightly knit? Are they siloed? Are they entrepreneurial? And doing that, again, very quantitatively. And then there's also sort of the sensor data side, which is on, when people are mostly in person. There are some things you can do remotely, which we can talk about, but less useful, or also get more problematic for a variety of reasons. But again, this idea that if we're in an office, you can then look at face-to-face interaction from even like Bluetooth IDs based on proximity between people. The stuff from Bluetooth is much more doable now. You can do things with badge in and badge out. And again, if people are in an office and then there's a meeting scheduled, then you can do things around inferring certain properties of that meeting. You get the Bluetooth data, again, then I can look at face-to-face interaction. But I really like combining all this to get a very holistic perspective on how work happens. I would not underestimate the impact of the financial industry on work environments moving forward. I really am very bullish and very interested on this confluence of using data to inform investment decisions about companies, right? And I think that what you're going to see is a bunch of private equity firms, a bunch of large banks are going to start to use these metrics to both in due diligence when they're thinking about investing or buying a company. They're going to use it in valuation decisions and all these other things. And so, over the coming years, that is going to be something that is going to be a standard. And if you can't answer those questions, people are going to short your stock, like, honestly, right? And so I think the first questions are not going to be explicitly about workplace. This is important. So the first questions are not going to be about how often are people in the office. I mean, some people might ask that a little bit, but those are like unserious questions, right? There are going to be these questions around how work happens, around attrition at the company, those sort of things. But they're all things that the workplace has an awful lot to say about. And so in preparation for that, setting up the mechanisms to actually be able to answer those questions and to be able to say, we are on a track to doing way better than everyone else, right? I think that is going to put, work environments center stage for most companies, right? And I think but again, that gets to thinking, moving from like just basically ignoring utilization rates and say, not ignoring, but like that is, do you need that? Because again, when do I have to schedule janitors? Again, it matters, but that is not what's important, right? So I think that is going to come, and it's going to come from the financial industry. And I think getting on top of that is ridiculously important, because then also if I'm selling, particular designs, what I'm selling is not like how cool does it feel? I'm actually selling how does it change how work happens, right? Which I think I'm being much more explicit about that. So whether I'm within a company, I'm in corporate real estate and I'm trying to figure out, how to build my portfolio, what I'm trying to do with it, whether I'm, an architect and I'm trying to figure out like, well, what am I trying to do with a particular client, or actually how am I supposed to talk about my approach to designing, offices or environments more broadly, or frankly, even if I'm a technology vendor, right, and I'm providing, some, online work environment platform, right? Like, why should I use Teams versus Slack? Either they are the same and then that's it, or no, we change things in a different way. Well, show me. That's where it's going to come, right? And I think that's going to be very, very interesting for this whole space.